Good morning, people of the internet. You're listening to Debi Radio 79.5 FM, a podcast where we discuss the movie Grosse Pointe Blank, 1 minute at a time. I'm your co-host, Dev.
And I'm the other co-host, Hugh, and on today's show, we are looking at minute 79. We are literally on the dance floor at the reunion, and there's lots of interesting characters we've met floating around in the background and starting to meet, but our eyes are really on Debbie and Martin front and center.
Yep. And joining us once again on the show, we have Robert Chandler of Space Age Films. Robert is an award-winning producer, writer, and director working in film, television, and animation. Welcome back, Robert. It's so good to have you on.
Yeah, thank you. It's a joy being on this. Actually, I'm loving every second.
Oh, fantastic! Thank you. Excellent. So, who wants to start on this one? I just want to make one very, very quick point, which is that in the last episode, both of you were discussing whether or not Piven's Paul Spiraki is getting to dance with Jenny Slater.
Mm-hmm. I know, and Rob was totally vindicated. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. As this episode opens, I think your point, Dev, about Paul being with someone else was like earlier in the shot.
Yeah,
when we were discussing how you could see the men and not the women, I think Paul was with someone else, and then as we see Martin, we see them behind, and I think it's all the rotation of the various partners, and it's almost, it's not quite a la Ron, but it feels almost classical.
Yeah, no, it's lovely. It's actually really well choreographed. As I was saying, the dancing's very good because there are some dancings where you just think, yeah, you've all been to dance school, good for you. But this is more people are dancing as their characters would dance, and it's a great moment to watch.
Yeah. I mean, given the kind of music that they're playing at this dance, I do kind of. I mean, not to say we didn't dance in the 80s to certain things, but it does. Do you know what I mean? It feels like this crowd.
We never danced. I never went anywhere but Susie and the Banshees were playing, other than Susie and the Banshees gig, and I did go in 1979. I've seen, but
we did.
People did not do this in school discos. We don't mind.
Not in England. Not in England.
No.
Yeah.
I suspect even less so in sort of good old-fashioned Main Street Grosse Pointe.
That's a really good point.
Yeah, but again, it's a fantasy, and part of the fantasy is you get to write your own soundtrack. Every
That's a good point.
Adolescent fantasy will confirm this. America is very conservative, isn't it? And that's why the backdrop to Grosse Pointe Blank is that sort of perfect. It's almost Disneyland's Main Street. It's that perfect. By perfect, I'm putting perfect in inverted commas, but without doing that, because that's a bit wanky, he said, having just done that. But that perfection, and that let's just go back to the baby shot, because the mother says, no, this is it. I'm really happy. And she's almost like, you can see she's on Ambien or Prozac or something. She isn't quite convinced that she's really happy, with these three children. And this is what I've always wanted.
Arlene Oslot Joseph, yeah.
Yeah,
I hadn't thought of it that way. Yeah, but you're right.
There's no way she isn't feeling fuck. Because one of the great lines in Friends, I think it is when Rachel, one of the sets of parents, they're still married, but they're falling out, and Rachel says, imagine marrying your high school sweetheart. That's what their problem is. And she's not wrong. I don't know whose set of parents it is. Forgive me for not getting that right. But the line stuck with me. To fall in love with someone at school and then marry them, and then you're set, and you haven't really experienced any life. Again, the fantasy of Grosse Pointe Blank is they both have. She has had a disastrous marriage with some psycho who probably trashed the place, and now she's forced to live back at home, and who wouldn't want to live in that big house? And he's had his 10 years doing what? He actually tells us what he's been doing. He joins the army. He ends up working in Iraq, I think, or Afghanistan, and killing people and finding he's good at it, and then coming back and making a career out of it.
Yeah.
but at least they didn't marry, or at least that prom night thing didn't happen, and they were trapped with each other, having not explored themselves or the world
Mm.
more before coming back to each other. Because I think you can still be in love with your high school sweetheart, but it's best not to have married her right then when you're 17, 18, or 19.
Mm.
And that again is a little aspect of the film which isn't really remarked upon, but I think is quite true, and what makes their relationship more real and actually stronger, because they because he didn't turn up on prom night.
Mm.
Yeah.
That's a really great way of looking at it. I hadn't thought of it like that at all. It's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, and so we're on the dance floor at the 79th minute. What music is playing? Because we get that Pete Townsend song at some point, don't we?
Yeah, so we've had the Pete Townsend song playing most of this time actually. So we're just getting to the end of "Let My Love Open the Door," which is the Pete Townsend song, and
Yeah.
then it will kick into a band that I have never heard of called Tones on Tail, with a track called "Go," which is this yeah, like
Okay.
very very upbeat tempo, which kind of and as the camera zooms back out, the lights have kind of come up, and it feels like it's kind of the like end of the night trying to shut
Yeah.
things down kind of song after
All right.
the slow romance. um but nobody seems to be taking any notice because they're all having a great time on the dance floor. But yes, it's, well, except for poor Terry, who's stood in the corner again with nobody.
Mm.
um but yeah, I mean, "Let My Love Open the Door" has been the score all through the balcony scene and all through that slow dancing at the
It's
start of
interesting
this.
because in 19, well, given the Clash and the Strummer credentials, the Violent Femmes, the Cure, the Beat, the Specials, Pete Townsend does not fall into that. He
No.
he was regarded as old school. There was respect
Mm.
for him. Of course, the Clash played Shea Stadium, supported the Who. Pete's been
Mm.
a vocal supporter of the Clash, and so
Mm.
there was a nice connection between the two, and Strummer and Townsend, and maybe that's one of the reasons that Kathy Nelson felt it was right for that scene. But for me, that
Mm.
song stands out because I'm not that interested in Pete Townsend as a solo artist. Um, Partly because I don't like the Who. I'm going to say it out loud. I just don't like them. There's nothing I can do about it, Hugh. I'm very
What?
sorry. Um,
No, okay, it's fine. I mean, you have strong opinions, Rob, and you always
yeah,
have as
I,
long as
I,
I've known you,
I, I,
and that's fair.
I get it. I think it's partly because
Mm.
of the whole mod thing, and I just thought that was
Mhm. That's
silly.
fair.
Wrong side
That's
of the
fair.
fence, yeah.
Yeah, but Pete Townsend had this solo career. His album titles are embarrassing. He's doing a sort of concept album about the Iron Giant. Oh my God! Obviously, that
Mm.
ended up in a good place because of Brad Bird. But
Mm.
there were some little bits of solo work that are remarkable, like the guitar he puts onto Heathen for David Bowie. Slow Burn is
Mm.
absolutely brilliant. And then this song, it's not a punky song, it's not a ska song, it's not a song you can dance to. It's a weird choice, but it works, and it's there, and it is a song explaining the moment, opening the door, being let into somebody. So it works, and in a way, I don't know what I'm saying other than it stands out for me as being wrong but right, and I think that's a good thing.
Yeah. No, I think that is. I think your point about connecting it directly to Strummer is the important key here. I think this is, this is your nod,
Yeah,
So, we've already talked about um uh in terms of acting, you were talking about Alan Arkin being in the wilderness.
yeah,
This is the equivalent musically
yeah, yep,
for this film. We're getting Pete in, in the same way you got Alan in. We're
yeah,
giving these people a chance, put them in front of people because we like them, we respect them, they matter to us.
yes,
To
yes,
Joe,
indeed,
this is important.
yes.
Because yeah, no, I can get behind your points about him as a solo artist.
Mm.
Very odd, to obsess with sort of concept albums and like trying to
It's never a good thing, ever.
No, no, but it's also that fact that when he was, I do like the Who, but I've come to the Who late
Yeah,
and in retrospect, so I have a more tempered view. And one of the things I've always found fascinating is the delusional nature in the '70s of the messianic sort of leadership he and the band were giving to
yeah,
a generation,
yeah,
and I just kept thinking to myself, you're one man on stage in front of what, early 70s, so it's not even it's not it's not that big. Gigs aren't were huge, but they weren't that big, were they, back
No,
then? It
that's
wasn't,
right. Yeah,
and you thought you were going to change the world.
yeah,
Like, really, dude,
yeah, yeah,
come
yeah,
on. She
yeah.
was like, there was something in the air. We really thought that we had a chance to bring a voice together. And I'm like, you're speaking in the most generic terms. You
Mm,
literally have no idea what sort of revolution you are trying to conceive of or make happen. And in the end, punk swept you away.
he
So,
did. He
you
did.
know,
But the good thing about Pete is he always respected punk, partly
yeah.
because he was he was a punk himself in a way that Roger
Mm,
Daltrey clearly wasn't, and
yes.
John Entwistle was a brilliant musician, but really
Yes.
unsexy. Um, and Keith Moon, I just think you're a liability. I have no romance about Keith's antics at all. But
Mm,
Pete, as a musician, is a really interesting guy. He was, he worked for Faber, choosing poetry for them
mm,
at one point.
mm,
So he's always
mm.
been an interesting character. And then, of course, the downfall, the Piven-esque moment of, the contents of his computer being
Yes.
revealed,
Yes,
and the
of
fall
course.
from grace. And all of that, which is nowadays a part of film analysis or appreciation or even criticism, to look at the sort of falling from grace of movie stars and special people in the way that rock stars have gone. There aren't any rock stars anymore. Let's face it, there just aren't. If they are, they're
Mm.
pretending to be rock stars.
Yeah, agreed.
But movie stars barely holding on to the concept of a movie star. Maybe Ryan Gosling pulled it back a bit at the
Yep,
Oscars with his Ken moment. Tom is hanging on there, or
yep.
hanging in there by his fingernails on the edge of a sort of Mission Impossible cliff, and so on.
Mm,
But generally, it's gone, and so the whole Me Too thing and the fall from grace, that does affect me watching the film when I look at Jeremy Piven. It just does.
mm,
When
mm,
I watch John Cusack, and I now know of his tweets, and the
mm,
very liberal tweets. They're often misspelled, and therefore he may have dyslexia. And and that affects how much of that screenplay did he write. Now you can write a screenplay with dyslexia, you can get programming, you can dictate, you can get spell and all that sort of thing. But I wonder how much of that credit was him writing or him improvising or him
mm,
shaping, all those sorts of things, that when you see a screenplay
mm,
with that many names on it, I'm always fascinated by who did what. And the old
mm,
rule of
mm,
ampersands and ands. If it's an ampersand, it means it's a team. If it's an and, it means they were working together separately. So we're starting to, obviously this is going back to the credits of the film, but the reason it's worth exploring is because it's such a good film. And
mm,
people think screenplays are dialogue, and when a film has sparkling dialogue like this one does, they think, well, that's a great piece of screenwriting. But William Goldman will tell you, as he always does, and he's brilliant, its screenplays are about structure, they're not about
mm,
dialogue. Dialogue is secondary. Otherwise you wouldn't be able to improvise and still make the film work. Otherwise, our director wouldn't be able to say, come on now, let's go nuts. The
mm,
only reason they can do that is because they have a solid structure, and someone somewhere carved that structure and made it work. And I'm not
mm,
sure where that falls. I don't get a sense of it, whether it was in the
mm,
original screenplay, whether it was in Cusack or Pink or any of the other credited writers, or whether it
mm,
was the director himself, who, let's face it, has probably done more writing of screenplays than any of the others put together,
mm.
and
That's a
all the
good
others
point.
put together. So again, it might be one of the great things that George has done without really taking credit for it.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, that would make a lot of sense. I do think that the one thing that maybe suggests that even if he wasn't writing, maybe he's in the room with his buddies talking and they're writing,
Yep.
is the fact that they all make High Fidelity next as their next production
Yeah. Another
as a
mention for the
team.
Clash and Jamie
Absolutely.
Jones, and
Yep.
they're
And
not
I
wrong.
and I think you can see all the similarities. You can
Yeah.
see how producing Grosse Pointe Blank informs their technique, their style, the choices they make as producers, the choices they make
I
as writers.
agree.
And I think I think you're right. If we were just analysing Grosse Pointe Blank just at this point in '97, you'd be spot on. But I feel like the fact that they then go on as a team
Yeah.
to then develop the next film, which has remarkable similarities,
Yeah, and
and you
bringing
start
in
to.
It's Jack
You know.
Black, isn't it? So
Yep.
bringing in a great improviser who you actually employ him
Yes.
to improvise. It's come on, Jack,
Exactly.
don't
So
hold
I do wonder if
And
yeah, as you
Cusack may
say,
just be surrounding, putting together the band, putting
exactly.
together the horn section and the rhythm section here, and here's the drummer. The drummer is Dan Aykroyd, and he's just gonna
Yeah.
hold or whatever. And
Yeah.
and
Yeah, that makes sense.
that's maybe where the skill is in this film.
Yeah.
Why the screenplay is split into, is it 4 or 5 credits? Um,
Yeah.
and when I think it's clearly an improvised line, but it's a line of great joy is when he refers to his sister and he calls her Sergeant Pepper because she's wearing the outfit with.
Such a great line.
It's a
Love
brilliant.
it.
You can't write that because you don't know what
Yeah.
the costume designer is going to bring that day.
Yeah.
It allows you to see the process and to see the improvisation. But like I say, that can only happen if your structure is rock fucking solid, and
Yeah.
and I think it was pretty good.
Yeah. And I think that given we were looking at a fourth draft, I would hazard a guess that that goes back to the original draft because I think
Yeah,
the screenwriter who they've credited all along from the very beginning with the original draft. I think that's the thing that he brought was this is the structure, and then everything else was them
yeah,
putting on their background because he's from the same place as them. He just wasn't involved once they took it further, and I think
right,
that's the
right.
key is that they looked at him and saw a fellow soul who they understood it. They were like, but as you say, they're the people because they're acting as well in this film, and you can see that improv is their thing, and it's
Yeah,
a bit different. So yeah, I think you're right. I think there's the structure is the key, and the structure I will hazard a guess comes from the very first draft or the very first writer, I should say, credited writer, I should say. But
yeah, yeah,
but either way, we have, as you say, Armitage's wonderful work, and here we are we're going to we're going to leave behind the dance floor in the final stages of this minute and
yeah,
and stick with Debbie and Martin. We've seen what's happening and we've got an awareness that Paul and Jenny are finally going to have a dance and other people are having dances. You can think, okay, fine. And as you said, Rob, there's a couple of people not having the dances, but that's it for them. Now, what matters is Debbie and Martin. The rom-com element. We're going to stick with our couple. We're going to
yeah.
follow them away from the dance floor, away from the crowd who's not their crowd. It's not their people.
And they go to
And
the
that's
nurses' room, don't they? I'm just.
yes.
Yep.
Yes, and I
And
assume this is because I don't remember where I came across this, but isn't there a thing in American high school films slash books slash romances that of the nurse's office being the place where the kids go and hide behind the curtain and get off with each other?
I hope so.
it's not a trope I'm familiar with, but I mean it seems appropriate, right? Like it's one of the few places in a school where you can imagine getting privacy.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
precisely.
it's after hours. There's no one around.
Yeah.
That really should be locked. That door, or does he open it?
Yeah, it
Um,
should be locked. I mean, I know,
Most
I
kids
know.
would be in there taking the drugs cabinet apart,
Yeah,
frankly.
well, to be fair, that might be the other reason they're going back there.
Because it's a little unclear, isn't it? Well, they're on the obviously the slap moment happens there, and that's a great moment. But then they go
Yeah.
on. There's the bed, and the curtain is drawn. Do they have sex? I think that's a bit unclear. Do they actually consummate the relationship? Afterwards, the way they're walking away from it, it's as though they have. But I'm not
Yes.
Yeah.
entirely. Do we think they have? I'm not sure. Are you
I think
quite?
it's played like they have, but the
Yeah.
Yeah.
question is, but it's left up in the air due to the editing as to whether or not.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
I frankly want to know. I'd rather that had been left in, not to
Uh,
be salacious about it, but just to be
no.
clear about it.
I
Yeah.
think I feel
Agreed.
like this might be once again George Armitage's like wanting to separate himself from his past works, right? With
Yeah,
private duty nurses and the
exactly.
sexploitation stuff
Do you
that
know what? I just spotted something in the lyrics, in the dialogue. It shows you brains in song. That may actually explain that, but I'm going to save it for our last episode this
Okay,
week because it's in that minute. But
okay.
there's a little bit of dialogue that may actually address directly what you are asking.
Yeah, it's just because she says you don't get to have me later, and I'm kind of thinking, well, in boyish terms, he's already had her. If
Mm,
they've had
good point.
sex.
That's actually a really good point.
Yeah, and so I didn't want them. I wanted them to snog away. Great, go for it. But not to actually consummate because that always kills the energy. of a couple on screen, um, you must never. It's the great rule of Mulder and Scully. You know,
Mm-hmm.
one of the reasons the X-Files was so good and so successful in those first seasons is because they were like a perfect boyfriend girlfriend who had just met. They were on a date, something exciting happened, but they never got to consummate their relationship, so they never actually got to spoil it. There was no sort of original sin rearing its head up. They
Mm-hmm.
were still in that
Mm-hmm.
idealized phase of protecting each other, dying for each other, even to seek the truth. And that's why their relationship was so strong. Once they, as someone said about sex in films, as soon as the couple consummates, it's like you're earthing all the energy, and the energy goes. um Romantic comedy especially, about that moment not happening, you put it off, you put it off, you put it off. And so I'm a little unsure about that moment with on the nurse's bed and the curtain. Either tell us they had sex then, and then let's deal with the fallout, or make it clear that they were just getting closer, but it was interrupted or whatever. But let us know, because otherwise that line, "You can't have me," or whatever she says, won't play as well. And I want it to play it at its best. I want to feel they didn't consummate, so that that's saved and the energy is still there, the potential energy, rather than the sort of all the energy being earthed.
What do you make of modern rom-coms where the sex happens very, very early on, and actually the story is about what happens after? So I'm thinking of things like Friends with Benefits,
Yeah.
and all that kind of subgenre of sex first, then we work out who we are, kind of thing.
Well, in a
I
way, they're
mean,
more realistic, aren't they? Because
mm,
that tends to be what happens. But at the same time, a romantic comedy is a fantasy. Um, I think one of the great rom coms is The Breakup with Vince Vaughn and Jennifer Aniston, because it sort of deals with the post coital in extremis, and it ends with them not being back together. It's actually a really
oh
downbeat film. It's almost noirish, and
wow, I need to see this. I've not seen this.
yeah, and of course at the
Mm,
time, they were the America's Sweethearts, to use
yes.
a John Cusack film title. Jennifer Aniston, Vince Vaughn, we all love them, and yet here was this really brave film. Everyone went to see it expecting this sort of great romantic comedy, and oh my God, no, it's made me feel quite sad. Well, boo hoo! This is
Huh.
cinema. This is good cinema. But the film flopped because of it. So
Yes.
I think it's a post-coital film, if you can call a subgenre of
Huh.
rom-coms.
Interesting. No, that's a really interesting idea. Because for me, it was partly generational, looking at who the actors are in these, who the creators are, who the filmmakers are,
Yeah,
and but I also I was going. My next question was going to be, and you've answered it with this film, was going to be, has anyone done a film, an anti rom com in that sense, in terms
Mm.
of where it is in this course of the
yeah,
relationship?
Should we?
and there it is, and with two great romantic comedians. I
Yeah.
think
Should we
that
circle back to this on the next episode? Because
yeah,
that's
yeah.
pretty much all we're going to have to talk about in the
Oh,
next
okay,
episode.
sorry.
No
So
worries. No,
Yeah.
that's fine. That's fine.
so
So
does the 79th minute end with the nurse's room door and the men?
yes,
Yes, that's right.
yes.
So she's leaning back against the door as they're making out, and then the start of the next minute is them actually going into the nurse's
Yeah.
I mean,
office.
because
So
that's fantasy. You escape from the dance with your girl, and you
Yeah.
go off somewhere to make out.
oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, she says health station, and he says health station, and she goes, I don't feel well, and neither do you.
Yeah.
Before he pushes her through the door, which is really quite funny.
All
Yes,
right.
That's like classic. Forget rom com. This is going back to the 40s, right? That
yes,
feels like that kind of proper 40s sexy dialogue,
yeah.
Yeah.
This was minute 79 of the Grosse Pointe Blank podcast, Debi Radio 79.5 FM, featuring your co-hosts, co-writers, and co-producers, myself, Hugh David, and Dev Salagar.
Today's guest, as he has been all this week, is Robert Chandler of Space Age Films. Robert, where can we find out more about you?
Thanks, Dev. Hi. Yeah, it's www. Sorry, three W's. Yes, of course there are three. Um, the World Wide Web dot Space Age Films, as one word, spaceagefilms.co.uk.
And
Fantastic.
you can find us on all good podcast players, as well as YouTube, X, and Spotify at Debi Radio, and our website, debiradio.com. And for all of those, it is DEBI Radio.
Finally, if you want to come and chat with us, find us at the Facebook listeners group, Debi Radio 79.5 FM Fan Club. One last time, that's DEBI Radio.
Sure was clear that all of this was new. Concentrating hard like a little girl, smoking for the first time. It wasn't a moment, it was a feeling of movement.